G'day guys, and today we're going to discuss a little bit about the history of marijuana prohibition within the United States. 2018 saw some good gains for the pro-legalization movement with Michigan, Utah, Ohio, Wisconsin and Missouri moving to change their legislation in various measures. Canada also finally fulfilled its promise to legalize it, and Denver is taking the next logical step, which is to legalize psilocybin, a very interesting chemical. The ball has even somewhat started rolling here in Australia, with the Liberal Democrats proposing a legalisation bill to the Senate. It was, of course, immediately shot down because the Australian Parliament is full of boomers, but failure can often be the first step towards success. I would not treat this as a major setback. The issue of marijuana criminalisation was tightly bound to fiscal interests at the time. Essentially, entrenched investors used the power of the state to make marijuana illegal so that they did not have to compete with its medicinal and material uses. If this sounds familiar, then good, you're noticing a pattern. This is exactly the same thing that is going on right now with the growth of alt media sites like Bitchute, Gab and Minds, and how they're being treated by the mainstream or lamestream media sources. Now, the history of marijuana prohibition within the United States begins at the start of the 20th century. Marijuana was already present in the United States in the form of cannabis for medicinal purposes and hemp for cloth, rope, all sorts of material purposes, but the recreational use of the plant was largely unknown. Indeed, the only laws concerning the plant were in regard to mandatory hemp growing laws, which were implemented at various stages within the country's history. Following the Mexican Revolution of 1910 to 1920, a greater number of Mexicans began to immigrate to the United States. They of course brought with them their language and cultural customs, one of which was the use of marijuana. Please note that is not a typo. Now, people in the southern border states of the US were concerned about the nature of these immigrants, coming as they were from a nation previously racked by civil war. The media used this concern as a potent financial strategy, whipping up fear about the immigrants in order to sell more newspapers and generate more profits. This is again akin to what we're seeing nowadays, with fringe political movements being whipped up by the media as a gigantic problem that everyone should be worrying about. Now we begin to see the entrenched interests rear their ugly heads. We have William Randolph Hearst, a media tycoon who had invested heavily in the wood pulp industry. He had lost approximately 800,000 acres of land to Pancho Villa, a revolutionary general during the Mexican Revolution, so he had a bit of an axe to grind with the Mexican people. He used his vast media influence to peddle stories about white women being attacked by Mexican immigrants high on marijuana in order to create a moral panic. Hearst certainly had a lot to lose with the upscaling of the hemp industry. He was heavily in debt to Canadian paper supplies. An emergence of an alternative to wood pulp for paper would have lowered the price of paper and thus drove down the price of his newspapers. Additionally, we also have Andrew Mellon, Secretary of the Treasury and also the richest man in America at the time. Mr. Mellon was thought to have thrown his support behind the anti-marijuana movement in an effort to protect his investment in the synthetic fiber nylon. There were also some entrenched pharmaceutical interests in regards to marijuana. I guess they didn't like the fact that people were able to grow medicine in their backyards, and thus they were losing out on a bunch of profit. They therefore wanted to regulate and control the supply of marijuana in order to control the money. So it's quite clear to see that there were several factions within the US economy that had a lot to lose with the proliferation of particularly hemp, but as well as the medical side of cannabis. Now, I doubt at the time many people have cared if they produced newspapers or propaganda that simply went along the lines of, oh, woe is us, we're going to lose so much money, think of us, pity us, pity us. What they had to do was create a mini moral panic. What they essentially had to do was reshape public opinion so the public was like, oh my god, this thing is so dangerous, we have to ban it, and run to the government. Users of marijuana become stimulated as they inhale the drug and are likely to do anything. Most crimes of violence in this section, especially in country districts, are laid to the users of that drug. Was it marijuana, the new Mexican drug that nerved the murderous arm of Clara Phillips when she hammered out her victim's life in Los Angeles? 3/4 of the crimes of violence in this country today are committed by dope slaves. That is a matter of cold record. Racial tensions were also stoked, much like they are today. There are 100,000 total marijuana smokers in the US, and most are Negroes, Hispanics, Filipinos, and entertainers. Their satanic music, jazz and swing results from marijuana use. This marijuana causes white women to seek sexual relations with Negroes, entertainers, and any others. Marijuana is an addictive drug which produces in its users insanity, criminality, and death. Reefer makes darkies think they're as good as white men, and such and so forth. Of course, the most famous piece of propaganda is the much maligned Reefer Madness propaganda film, which involves high school students trying marijuana and results in hit-and-run accidents, manslaughter, suicide, attempted rape, hallucinations, and general descent into madness.
I know what you want. You want to kill me. You're crazy. Take it easy, kid. I just want to talk to you.
After many years of propaganda, a proposal was made to the US Senate, which resulted in the marijuana tax of 1937, which effectively outlawed the production and sale of the drug through a tax stamp, costing $1, that was never made publicly available. The hearings on the dangers of marijuana were plagued by poor attendance and questionable studies. Hearst's media empire was instrumental in shaping public perception, claiming a link between cannabis and violent crime. Indeed, the spelling of marijuana was changed to marijuana with a J, in an effort to associate it with the Mexicans, as it resembled the spelling of the Mexican city Tijuana. Now, the marijuana tax of 1937 was later ruled unconstitutional in 1969 under the Fifth Amendment, but that didn't really solve anything. In response to the repeal, the US Congress passed the Controlled Substances Act, which prohibited any form of cannabis use and also gave it a Schedule I classification, with a high potential for abuse and no accepted medical benefits. Now, it would be pretty obvious to say that the people who were peddling newspapers, nylon, certain drugs at the time would have benefited immensely from this. They were able to keep their business model going, not have to change, not have to innovate, anything like that. But what is difficult to see, as is often the case, is the issue of hidden losses. Through the actions of the state, how much revenue was lost to the United States? Consider the impact of 80 to 90 years of hemp production, cannabis production, and that sort of thing. How many jobs would this have generated for the US economy? How much money would this have generated for the US economy? And I'll concede the point. How much tax revenue would have been generated throughout the 80 or 90 years of hemp and cannabis production? This question, in my view, is largely unanswerable due to the large stretch of time and no reference comparison that can be made in the modern world. So there you have it, a small slice of history concerning the prohibition of marijuana within the United States. I'm reasonably confident this is not all the history, all the facts, all the data that went into the prohibition of marijuana, but it's certainly an interesting little slice that was actually proliferated in my mind by a YouTube comment I saw many years ago. I hope this video allows you to push back against some of the propaganda saying marijuana was outlawed because it was a danger to society, that sort of thing. No, marijuana was outlawed because it presented a threat to entrenched economic interests at the time. Thanks all for sticking around, and have a good one.